Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologue. I'd like to encourage you to visit Guns Etc. They're strong supporters of our president and the principles our country was founded upon. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and it's a firearm lover's paradise. And for all your online firearms needs, just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks. Welcome back. Monday, March 16th, 2020. I hope you had a good weekend. I don't know if you watched the Biden-Sanders debate last night, but it probably was the proverbial nail in the coffin for the Sanders campaign. Joe Biden ate his Wheaties in that he made no major gaffes, and Sanders seemed tired. Not in the meaning of exhausted, but tired in that he just said the same thing we've heard from him again and again, over and over. Yes, I watched a few Biden slips here and there, and frankly, I think too much is being made of it on Twitter and elsewhere. So he botched a digit or name here and there. I think, to be honest, he didn't make his usual mistakes. He didn't make mistakes by factors of 10 or 100 or 1,000 or more. His slips were normal, the kind anyone would make speaking for an hour or an hour and a half. It's not to say I don't expect a lot of bad, worse, and deeper gaffes and slips from him. I don't think he looked or sounded very strong. I do think he's enfeebled, and I do look forward to Donald Trump eating his lunch. You know, it's an amazing thing. To journalists, Ronald Reagan slips and is dumb or old. George Bush slips and he's dumb or dumber. Dan Quayle slips and he's an idiot. But everything from I voted for it before I voted against it, to 57 states, to Joe Biden's ongoing assault on facts and figures by massive numbers, it's all quite forgivable and normal to most of the journalists. But as long as I was being honest above about Joe Biden's de minimis slips last night, let me also make the point out there that there's nothing Reagan or Quayle or Bush has said that is as badly off or wrong or stupefying as the things Joe Biden has said. But, you know, don't worry, be happy. Nothing to see here with Joe Biden, according to today's journalists, even as he will be older, if elected, upon taking office, than Ronald Reagan was when he retired from office. At least Reagan and Quayle and Bush went big and looked to big issues. Reagan, obviously, to bring America's economy back and defeat the Soviet Union, which everyone else said we could just accommodate or live with. Quayle took on the third rail of politics with single motherhood and absentee fathers. Bush took us through the biggest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor and through a massive recession many have since forgotten about. In fact, a year after Dan Quayle upset the apple carts with his Murphy Brown speech, Barbara Defoe Whitehead wrote a lead article a year later in the liberal Atlantic Monthly magazine entitled, "Dan Quayle Was Right." The subtitle, quote, "Though it may benefit the adults involved, the dissolution of intact two-parent families is harmful to large numbers of children. Moreover, family diversity in the form of increasing numbers of single-parent and step-parent families does not strengthen the social fabric, but rather dramatically weakens and undermines society," close quote. We're still dealing with that today. Those numbers have worsened. And it's part now of every serious welfare reform debate, isn't it? Of every poverty debate. William F. Buckley wrote in 1992 that the only relevant question in that presidential election year was, what do you propose to do about the rising rate of fatherlessness? I was put in mind of that when reading a book of Buckley's from 1992 titled Happy Days We're Here Again. An interesting title, as you remember things fondly from the 1980s and early 1990s, even if it did yield a Bill Clinton presidency. Seems we haven't had a lot of happy days since then, doesn't it? We lurched from then to the Oklahoma bombing, to the Unabomber, to crises like the Balkans and the Sudan, to Iraq, to 9/11, and things just haven't seemed safe and easy since then, have they? What is that? A topic for another time, but something to think about. My temporary thesis is that as multiculturalism and political correctness came to be more and more the norm, American exceptionalism and patriotism became more and more a down-market commodity, where we became culturally doubtful about the rightness of our cause, our country, and American exceptionalism. It became, in other words, chic to blame America for others' woes or our own, and never outside forces or enemies. Last night, Joe Biden gave some voice to this, blaming the humanitarian crisis in Darfur on global climate change. He said exactly this, quote, You saw what happened in Darfur with the change in weather patterns and the desert there. It causes war. It causes great migrations. Great migrations. They said that's the single biggest problem, close quote. Who said that? Not the people, not the civilians of Darfur. As the Council on Foreign Relations put it, Darfur was about, quote, government-backed Arab militias known as Janjaweed that began burning villages and conducting large-scale massacres, close quote. It was the Hind helicopter of the Islamist government in Khartoum that caused the mass killings. Indeed, when actors and actresses like Mia Farrow were protesting the Darfur crisis, they know who to blame. Omar Bashir and China for propping him up. This was the same regime that gave safe haven to Osama bin Laden. But to Democrats today, to Joe Biden today, it was climate change. When enemies of our culture or society become soft and amorphous, I also worry about what's going on in America right now, with the fear and worry over the coronavirus. I've spoken to my doctors, 3 of them. They've each told me the same thing. There's a lot of overreaction. What say you? I'm with Heather McDonald here, but you tell me if she or I am wrong. Here she is in the new Criterion. Quote, compared to what? That should be the question that every fear-mongering news story on the coronavirus has to start with. So far, the United States has seen 70 deaths from the infection. 22 of those deaths occurred in one poorly run nursing home outside of Seattle. Another 9 deaths occurred in the rest of Washington state, leaving the other deaths as spread throughout the rest of the approximately 329 million residents of the United States. This represents roughly 0.00012% of the U.S. population. What actually matters is whether or not the growing pandemic overwhelms our ability to ensure the well-being of U.S. residents with efficiency and precision. But fear of the disease, and not the disease itself, has already spoiled that for us. Even if my odds of dying from coronavirus should suddenly jump 10,000-fold, from the current rate of 0.00012% across the U.S. population all the way up to 0.12%, I'd happily take those odds over the destruction being wrought on the U.S. and global economy from this unbridled panic. By comparison, there were 38,800 traffic fatalities in the United States in 2019. That represents an average of over 100 traffic deaths per day. If the press cataloged these in as much painstaking detail as they have deaths from coronavirus, highways nationwide would be as empty as New York subways are now. Even assuming that coronavirus deaths in the United States increased by a factor of 1,000 over the year, the resulting deaths would only outnumber annual traffic deaths by 2,000. Shutting down highways would have a much more positive effect on the U.S. mortality rate than shutting down the U.S. economy to try to prevent the spread of the virus. She goes on, but it's her conclusion that has me thinking the most right now. It's hard to imagine that the panicked leaders and populace of today would have been able to triumph in the last century's world wars. America's colleges sent off thousands of their young men to fight and die in those wars. Those students went off with conviction and courage. Currently, colleges and universities are shutting down with no hint of the virus in their vicinity. Would today's panicked leaders and populace be able to triumph in the face of a world war or some other legitimately comparable threat? Let's hope that we do not have to find out. Is this worry not relevant? I've long been concerned about hard America versus soft America, the Michael Barone thesis. I think I first noticed it when, while in Washington, papers like the Washington Post and organizations like CNN and MSNBC put us through massive breastfeeding and hand-wringing over the first 500 and then 1,000 deaths of soldiers, American soldiers in Iraq. I don't want to be misunderstood here. All tragic, all of them. Every one of the 2,500 American deaths in Afghanistan over the last 19 years, every one of the 5,000 deaths in Iraq, every single one is the death of a hero. Tragic. But we thought of 9/11 and its response as World War III at one point. And I thought of the battle my dad was in World War II, Okinawa. 2.5 months was that battle, 20,000 American deaths. Or any major battle in World War II where you had thousands of deaths per month, sometimes per week. The Battle of Tarawa, for example, was 1,600 deaths in 3 days. And I thought, do we have what it takes anymore to deal with major crises or wars or viruses? Has the safe space ethos where college students have become afraid of an argument they don't agree with invaded the rest of the culture and made us soft on everything? You've heard me before on this, but I give you Adam Carolla from his testimony to the House of Representatives a couple years ago. He said, we're talking a lot about the kids, and I think they're just that, kids. We are the adults. And I don't think we are doing the children. I mean, these are 18 and 19-year-old kids that are going to these college campuses. We're not doing them any favors. They grew up dipped in Purell, playing soccer games where they never kept score, and watching Wow Wow Wubsy, and we're asking them to be mature. We need the adults to start being the adults. Studies have shown that if you take people and you put them in a zero-gravity environment like astronauts, they lose muscle mass. They lose bone density. We're taking these kids in the name of protection. We're putting them in a zero-gravity environment, and they're losing muscle mass and bone density. They need to live in a world that has gravity. When you need to expose your children to germs and dirt in the environment to build up their immune system, you start building gravity. Our plan is put them in a bubble, though, keep them away from everything, and somehow they'll come out stronger when they emerge from the bubble. Well, it's not happening, he said. And I now show you the times. I'm Seth Leibsohn. We'll be right back.